do it.
Okay.
Okay, you are good to go.
Very good. Good morning, everyone. I'll call this meeting to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
You are good to go.
Good. Pledge of Allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of
of
America
America,
and to the
the
republic
republic
for which it
which stands,
one
one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice
for all.
Amy, do you want to call attendance here since we're in a virtual meeting?
Yes. President Garrett,
Present.
Vice President Traylor,
Here.
Councilor Burke,
Here.
Councilor Choi,
Here.
Councilor Culp,
Here.
Councilor Melton,
Here.
and Councilor Plunkett.
Here.
Thank you.
Very good. We have the approval of the memorandum of the September 8th, 2020 regular meeting. A copy has been posted. Any questions on that? All right, I'll make a motion to approve.
I will second that.
Okay. I heard Councilor Culp first. Amy, do you want to do a roll call on that?
Yes. President Garrett,
Yes.
Vice President Traylor,
Yes.
Councilor Burke,
Yes.
Councilor Choi.
Yes.
Okay. Councilor Culp,
Yes.
Councilor Melton,
Yes.
Councilor Plunkett.
Yes.
Thank you.
Memorandum of the September 8th, 2020 regular town council meeting is approved by a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Next up, we have request to speak. If any member of the audience would like to speak, please raise your hand. Amy, I see
Yes,
one
we have
hand up.
one.
Promote Mr. Triscari. Oh, and I've also got
Yeah,
the
just a
mayor with
minute.
her hand up as well. We'll get her next.
Okay.
Mr.
Okay, my
Triscari, I think you know the drill, but 3 minutes and just give your name and address and I'll start the clock after that.
Okay, my name is Craig Triscari. I live at 3270 Paddock Road. As of September 21st, 2020, Van Trust has failed to run an 8-inch water line into Saratoga after the November 2018 ordinance passing. Van Trust is in violation total disregard of Zionsville official commitment letter. It seems this company is incapable of holding to a commitment, and this board fails to enforce their own public commitments to the community of Perry Township and Zionsville Rural. It is nearly 1 year from when Van Trust was allowed by Zionsville to get water for their site in violation of commitment letter to Saratoga. The Van Trust lawyer told this board that water was not contingent on phase 2, but has continuously tied it to phase 2. Van Trust stated in public to this board that they had the number required to put in the line, and they have still failed to do so. So lying to this board seems to be acceptable. Additionally, you need to review your current construction ordinances. They are designed for short-term building based on noise issues. We have problems with noises at 5 o'clock in the morning and early Saturday morning. Since this construction will be years in the making, you need to fix the construction noise ordinance issues for development in that area to reflect the long-term construction you have condemned this community to. Last week, there was a dusting issue. It looked like the Dust Bowl in this area. That needs to not happen again. Van Trust should be prepared to pay to wash down these homes in the area if it does. Finally, Van Trust needs to put the proper size trees on the dirt mound, and Zionsville should enforce their own laws and ordinance and commitments to include the height of the berm, the fence size, tree types. Van Trust can try to exceed the standard, but they cannot reduce the standard. No private agreement is acceptable. That is why we hold you accountable. If you plan to buy a home in Zionsville, be very cautious. The leadership doesn't abide by their comprehensive plan. They don't have a comprehensive plan, nor do they care about the property values. Homeowners on 421 or near the highways should reduce their taxes to Zionsville based on their reckless development. Leadership, to include the town council team, has provided to date zero value added to the greater rural Zionsville community and homes along 421. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Triscari. Mayor Styron, looks like you requested 3 minutes here. So if you can give your name and address, and I'll start you after that.
Hi, my name is Emily Styron, and is it my home address or where I'm sitting right now that I give you?
If you're speaking as a resident, it'd be your home address.
Well,
If you don't want to give that, you can give your town hall address.
Sure, I'm speaking as the mayor, and so my address here is 1200 Oak Street, Zionsville, Indiana, 46077.
Very good.
Great. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to share some concerns that I have about a couple of agenda items that are on the docket for today. There are two items that relate to both a fire and a police safety board. And I haven't had an opportunity to sufficiently review them and fully articulate what I'd like to share with you with regard to my concerns. And I would appreciate if you would table these items for this morning so that I can use that additional time to review them thoroughly and submit a response for a future meeting. You've been able to take some time to prepare for this information to be presented to you today, and I would just love to have the same consideration and carefully review them and prepare a response to go along with your discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't see any other hands raised, so we will move on then to old business. We've got one old new business item. It's a consideration of an ordinance establishing a Department of Public Works and creating the positions of Director of Public Works and Division Supervisors. This is a first reading and has been continued from the September 8th meeting. This is ordinance number 20-09. I know Mr. Lance and the mayor had presented this at the last meeting, and we decided to postpone that by one meeting for a chance for councilors to submit and ask questions. Those questions were submitted. I appreciate staff and administration for responding to those. I think all of you saw a note back from Ms. Lacey yesterday with those questions. In addition, I think council is aware of this, but just so the public is aware of this, that this ordinance was amended by this council to retain certain oversight for the position of the well, today it's the director of wastewater, which would no longer be that position with this move. And just given the importance of that position and the treatment of wastewater within our community, keeping that oversight that was within the sphere of the reorg was something that we felt was important. I'll open it up to councilors for any questions or follow-up questions that may not have got answered in the FAQ or any statements or comments that you may have on this topic. Or if there are none.
I just had a couple of questions in the initial introduction of this Department of Public Works. The structure was as such that if approved and when we had the funding available for it, that this would add 6 new positions to the town. The questions that we had submitted obviously says that it doesn't add any new, it doesn't add those 6, only adds 1, and that's the administrative assistant. But then if it's approved, we're hiring at least 1 engineer, 2 additional positions. I guess I'm a little confused as to whether or not it's really 6, if it's only 1, if it's 3. And then my other question is, if we're replacing $1.7 million, or we're spending $1.7 million in engineering fees, and the goal is to save 20% of that. I guess my question is, if this is approved, why don't we have more engineers so that we can save more of that money and not continue to use some of the companies that were farming some of this out too?
Oh, Mr. Lance, I see you were promoted, so.
Yes, and during that transition, I lost a little bit of Councilor Plunkett's comments, but I believe I caught the gist of them. Specific to the number of employees, this ordinance creates the new department or a new division of engineering. And within the budget presentation you saw on Wednesday, there were several additional staffing that are requested for 2021, irrespective and independent from the DPW. Some of those positions that I highlighted in our discussion were a additional facilities manager. We have our facilities, that department, that division is going to need propped up with we only have one person currently in that position. We're seeking to add a person to that. We're looking at adding capacity in the street division. We want more labor, and we want another person in the stormwater division to help with all the 200 plus inspections and additional customer requests we get for inspections. So this was sort of, the presentation sort of blended a preliminary budget presentation with a DPW, but if DPW goes off the table, we are still like to have the discussion of the same budget amount and the same staffing levels that were proposed in the budget. Could you, Councilor Plunkett, remind me of the second party? Oh, it was the finances, the 1.7 million.
Yeah, I think Lance, the question about the 1.7 is if we're, I know you'd mentioned you'd like to have an engineer on staff, and my question is if we're saving, you know, $340,000 or 20% of that 1.7 for engineers, why not hire 3 or 4 engineers or 4 or 5 still underneath your 1.7, and we can keep all that stuff in house?
Well, I think it's a very good question. I think that's where we'd like to go. But I think that initially we didn't want to take a too big a bite of this apple and grow this department as we have with any other department. So, you know, if you want to give a fund 4 engineers and we'll give it a shot, you know, I'd love to take that opportunity. But I think just from a management aspect and an integration aspect, we'd like to start this as a small effort and then grow it as we see actual results through the years.
I think this is Alex Choi. I think one of the things that you said, Lance, in the past was that there are, and this was why I had thought that we weren't just going to go out and hire a ton of engineers, was that there are some things that are very specialized that a subcontracting to an engineering firm would make sense because they have such a wide number of experts in a variety of areas. But if we were to hire our own engineers, they're more like generalists and they wouldn't have those capabilities. So hiring a number of generalists may not make as much sense as those areas where we can subcontract out to an engineering firm where they have specialists in certain areas.
Agreed. Yes, thank you.
Mr. Lance, if we approve this, or actually, well, this is actually a two-step process. We wouldn't necessarily approve it. Let's just say this gets approved. We really haven't had a chance to review the budget. I know we're getting an introduction to it today. If we approve this, but then for whatever reason, positions decided not to be funded for this budget, I'm not saying they would, I'm just sort of, hey, here's a scenario. Is there any harm in that? I obviously know some of maybe the things you want to do would be done, but are the efficiencies you're still talking about and just structurally, does that still make sense even if positions weren't funded?
Well, sure it does. As a simple management strategy and technique for the town, combining these under a singular umbrella for operational of the existing departments makes every argument I've made, you know, or point I've made holds true, even if we don't fund the new positions. If we don't fund the new positions, it's not the first time we've taken on tasks with less staff than we'd like. So there, as I said, I think in the last meeting, you know, no harm, no foul. If we can't afford engineers, if we can't add staff, that's something we faced in the past and something we'll likely face in the future. But it would be, in my opinion, wise to get this structure in place so that when the financial capacities are there, if they are not this year, that we can grow into it. But we can also begin immediately enjoying the operational efficiencies of operating under a single umbrella organization.
And I know we had made just some very small tweaks to the ordinance. I mentioned earlier around reorg. None of those changes really will change the efficiencies you're hoping to achieve here or the management philosophy or structure that is the spirit of this DPW creation. Is that a fair statement?
In my reading, no, I didn't see anything that was added that would change the reporting structure that's being proposed under DPW.
Okay, great. Counselors, any other questions here? Jason, I saw you came off mute.
Yeah, I think I would just like to know, I mean, it seems like there certainly appear to be a tremendous number of positives associated with this Department of Public Works. I think that from where I stand is we talk about putting the department in place, and if we have the money, then we'll hire the people, and if we have the money, then we'll fill the spots, and we'll change what needs to be changed. I feel like we're, you know, in many ways recently putting the cart before the horse here. It'd be nice to know from the town's perspective, line by line, where this money's coming from, so that we can say we have the money, we're going to do it, and it will be done by, you know, whenever the ordinance or whenever it's passed. It just seems like it seems like the ask of the council is to approve it, and then we'll figure it out. And I guess I would just like to see where this is coming from.
Well, and I don't disagree, Jason. I mean, I think it does at least feel, you know, we asked the administration last meeting and Mr. Lance to sort of create a budget, assuming that this was in place. You know, we have to still review that budget, right? And look at, all right, if you look at them as separate entities, you're just combining the two. What was the budget last year of the separate? What is the budget combined? And then what should the budget be? So I certainly see your point. I also feel relatively confident in creating this. If we decide, yeah, the budget should be flat for that combined entity, we'll still save some money with the engineering and be set up for the future. So you could argue the other way, right? If you did the budget first and then did it, it's, you know, well, you've done a presumptive budget and then don't do it where you left. So, but I think your point is well taken.
Craig, Brad, I know obviously this is an interesting question to ask for someone who's championing this, but you've been around a long time, you're an expert. There are communities that have in-house engineering and those that don't. What's the downside to doing this? What would be the best reason not to make this in-house and continue to go out-house? Or why have we continued to do that over the last, you know, decade or so?
Was that, I'm sorry, I missed the beginning. Were you addressing that to me? I don't want to jump in if somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, perfect. From my small business background, and those with small businesses know that employees are the #1 liability because you want to be able to sustain them. But I think that the town has reached the point where we can sustain added staffing levels. We're doing it across the board as we grow. The reason we haven't done this in the past is that we have been in that awkward adolescence stage where we're right at the cusp, and it was making that final push to get over the hump. I don't really think of a downside other than either the ubiquitous concern of adding employees, and is that a sustainable effort, which I believe it is. But other than that, there's no downsides. We just need to grow up and become an operation that you would expect to find in a community of our standards and population.
Greg, you had a question?
Mine was just kind of a generalization. It seems like to me that, you know, we've been running a certain way, very conservative for an extended period of time as the town of Zionsville, which is a great way to lead. I think with our expansion and creating the mayor's position through the reorganization, I really feel that now's the time to potentially, you know, step to the next level and allow this administration potentially to do, you know, a structuring that they feel will be able to meet the needs of our constituents. And I think this is just an interesting combination of ideas coming together, but having a DPW I'm a little fearful of that, having essentially one person in charge that reports, that catches all these reports as well as reports them to the mayor. But I think ultimately if the administration is designing it this way, from a budgeting standpoint, I think we still have a little bit of ability to control that, but we'll be able to see the addition of an engineer, X dollars. Again, if we do bring this all into house. But I think, like Lance just alluded to, is we're in the infancy stage of becoming small town to just a little bit bigger town with the same priorities. And so that's I guess my question is the structuring essentially going to be one person reporting back to this is for Lance to the deputy mayor and mayor in the planning department, I guess, from that perspective. Is that the DPW response?
In essence, yes. I'm currently a department head that manages and oversees facilities management, streets, and stormwater. That relationship I have with the council and your oversight budgetarily and otherwise remains in place. In effect, it is cross off street department and make it DPW, and then put a few more services under the purview of that organization. But all the relationships, all the responsibilities, all the authorities remain essentially as they are today under our reorganization.
Craig, one thing I'm going to add to that, and I've sort of mentioned this earlier, is if you think about today, we have two department heads, right? One is run by Mr. Lance, one is run by Mr. Cook. We are moving Mr. Cook under Mr. Lance in this organization. However, when we did the reorg, as you know, department heads that cannot be terminated with the approval of council, just to make sure that that move is not political in nature and is performance in nature. And given the importance of stormwater and not wanting to lose that oversight from a council and a reorg standpoint, this ordinance was effectively stated that Mr. Cook or whoever is in that position, when he were to leave, if the mayor, whoever that mayor was at that time, wanted to terminate that individual, we would still have the oversight if we felt it was warranted or not. And certainly any department head, that should be warranted on a performance standpoint and not for any other reason. So that's where I think, to your question, we're still, for us, it's very similar, right? It's just perhaps a more efficient way of accomplishing things, and it's a progressive way as we continue to grow. So a little context there.
Just to comment along that line, that's where I struggle with a little bit, is that we are effectively combining two departments and a few other ancillary services under one department, but we are not giving a full department head status to the
Wastewater
director of the public works, because you're maintaining a protected status to wastewater department. I'm not saying I disagree with where this ordinance is going, but that seems, that's what I'm struggling with right now. So between now and then, I'll have to come to an understanding of, what will happen to this superintendent of wastewater department as they fold underneath the director of the Department of DPW, because now you're not giving a full authority to the, if you're creating one department effectively, you're not giving full authority to that department of or director of the DPW, but creating this very odd relationship. So I'm struggling a little with that, and I'll obviously have to think about it pretty carefully between now and a couple weeks from now.
If I may, President Garrett, throw out a couple of comments here, not to belabor your points or prolong your agenda. Most communities, as I said, our size have a DPW, where any public works, any construction type, any project type driven department is overseen by an individual or individuals to make sure there is common effort and messaging across all those departments. So a DPW is found everywhere. Whitestown has its own DPW because it has sewer and water. The other thing I would like kind of just draw a similarity to building inspectors. When I began, the town did not have any of its own employee building inspectors. Everything was outsourced. And to think now that we would be operating without a town employee building inspector structure would make absolutely no sense. But at the time, some of these similar conversations were had. Are we ready for a building inspector? So we've done this before. These are growing steps as communities expand. So I kind of liken this again to the thought of hiring a building inspector. We now have 3 full-time and 5 arguably, depending on their areas. So it's where we've been before. We struggle with these steps as we advance ourselves, but it's certainly not uncommon even within our town or unprecedented.
Good. Any other comments or questions? All right, and this is a creation of an ordinance. So based on today's vote, if it was a favorable vote, this is a 2-step process. So you can continue to ask questions on this. How you vote today does not necessarily mean how you have to vote a second time if there's a second time. So just something to be aware of, counselors. Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we may have touched on this last meeting, but again, question DPW to Lance and maybe the mayor if she, I don't know how this is working, if she's on here or not, but the facility, is there going to be a DPW facility still again? Is that our vision still? And does this ordinance help set that off and head in that direction, or are we still, and this is in regards to the facilities that were entered at the end of the year last year that failed for DPW, all right, for a facility for the street department.
I see that the mayor's been brought online, so if she has anything to opine, certainly we'd like to hear from her. To your specific question, no, this really is independent. The staffing that's added are housed within our existing facilities. It doesn't create any more sense of urgency or less sense of urgency for remote facilities or new facilities. The existing capacities within town hall, there are many for office spaces, and that's where any new employees, engineering specifically, would be housed.
Yes, exactly what Lance said. And I would say that we've been working with Lance and Bobby in facilities to look at areas where we can use more space in town hall to house our existing employees, because as you recall, some of the rationale behind the municipal complex campus that was proposed late last year had to do with pressure at the municipal building and just needing to look for more space for staff. So we have been working on that internally, but it hasn't really it doesn't impact the DPW structure in terms of needing new space to be built or created. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you.
Lance asked this last time, but I just want to reconfirm. As a utility, wastewater has the ability to set rates. I'm assuming, though, that the revenue generated from those rates cannot be used for non-utility reasons. In other words, this can't become a means to additional taxing for things that aren't being taxed.
That is correct. The wastewater is 100% user fee driven. It is an enterprise fund. It is a utility with its own revenue and expense streams. You guys set utility rates. They cannot adjust their rates without your approvals, upwards or downwards. And of course, you have budgetary oversight across all the funds. So this doesn't alter in any way the current revenue streams or expense streams.
Any other questions? I'm comfortable in what I've heard, and again, I don't want to delay this too long. So I would make a motion to approve, knowing that we have another 2 weeks if there's additional questions, if additional conversation needs to happen, if there are concerns that need answered, or if someone decides this is not the right approach. It's certainly something to ponder, but I'd make a motion to approve this as presented or as written here today.
Second.
There's a second from Counselor Burke. Ms. Lacy, do you want to do a roll call on that, please?
You're on
Amy,
mute,
you're
Amy.
on mute, Amy.
Sorry about that. Okay, President Garrett,
Yes.
Vice President Trailer,
Yes.
Counselor Burke,
Yes.
Counselor Choi,
Yes.
Counselor Culp,
Yes.
Counselor Melton,
Yes.
Counselor Plunkett.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good. Ordinance number 2020 is introduced with a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Moving on to new business. First we've got is a budget introduction. Tammy Hard, our CFO, is going to be presenting this to council. I believe we should have received this presentation this morning at 7:13 a.m. So I hope everyone's had time to digest it.
Tammy should be here in just a second. There she is.
Hey, before we get rolling on that presentation, I just want to ask Heather. This is just an introduction. There's no vote on anything today, right?
Right. I think that the thought is just to give you the information. So I know that earlier there was a question kind of offline about timing and timelines, and I'm sure that Tammy will be able to expand on that. The budgeting process is always a little bit tight because there's information that comes in from the county that is related to our circuit breaker and sort of what revenues we're going to have in the door. And we've got a schedule that gets published by the Department of Local Government Finance. And while we're a little bit ahead of it, the deadline that you could publish the public notice to the Department of Local Government Finance, the latest you could do that would be October the 11th, because you have to have that published 10 days prior to the original first reading of the budget and the public hearing, which, by statute would need to be October 21st. So all the materials have to be to the Department of Local Government Finance in final form by November 1st. So I know that there was a question about publication to the Department of Local Government Finance by the 25th. I'm assuming what's the timeline there is to try to get it 10 days prior to our regularly scheduled meeting on October the 5th. If the council felt like they needed more time, we could, talk with the administration and hold a special meeting, but I'm certain that the timelines were delineated based on that information of when our regular meetings were set for the month of October. So I'll let Tammy, further maybe expand on that. But that is, my guess of how as she gives you the presentation, Tammy, I don't want to jump you in your presentation, but I know that that's been a question for folks, and kind of looking at the deadlines, I'm assuming that's sort of how you backed into that in that date, the 25th. So.
Yes, absolutely. Heather outlined that perfectly with the state statutory deadlines, as well as we were trying to match up with the regularly scheduled meetings so that everyone would know and be able to attend those meetings. So I will go ahead and jump into the presentation, and then we can have time for questions as well. So you should be seeing my screen right now, and it should say 2021 budget introduction. I'll confirm. Okay. So going over the timeline, today is the 21st, and this is the date that we had set for the budget introduction. The budget publication will be on Friday, which, as Heather mentioned, would be 10 days before the public hearing, which is a regularly scheduled council meeting on the 5th. And then we have the budget adoption consideration on the 19th. Again, if the adoption consideration, if you wanted to move that, that would have to be adopted before November 1st. Just jumping in, it was asked to do some side-by-side comparisons of 2020 versus 2021. This is based on the documents that are available in Gateway. So again, trying to do kind of an apples to apples comparison and not taking into account the encumbrances and other ancillary things that happened during the year. So just what was proposed last year to what is proposed this year. As you can see from 2020 to 2021, the net increase is 766 more in revenues than expenses over those 2 years. This goes back to the sustainability and how we look at things, and not just in 1 year time frame. We're looking over time. So in 2020, the budget that was adopted had more revenues than expenses by 2.7 million. The 2021 budget is proposed to have $2 million more in expenses than in revenues, but keep in mind that capital expenses are included in both of these numbers. And in 2021, for instance, you know that you've got $1.2 million of new land costs due to a roundabout. Looking at the revenue estimates, again, trying to do an apples to apples comparison, more revenue is expected in 2021. Note that these revenue estimates do not include special distributions and other things that we have gotten in 2020 or may get in 2021. We always try to underestimate our revenues and then have the expenses as this is the max that we will get. Like when we put in for personnel, we put in for the full amount if they're getting all the, as if they were getting all the benefits, but that may not actually be the case. Overall expense estimates, you can see this is on a fund by fund basis. So this is a little bit different than what you saw in the last presentation, but has the same numbers in it. So for example, when you're looking at the fire department, in the presentation that we did last Wednesday for the budget workshop, we had the fire department, and that included both the fire portion in the general fund as well as the cumulative fire and the public safety lit. And so this now breaks that up into a fund by fund area. So looking a little more closely on the general expenses, so excluding the fire and parks, because we were able to break that out this year. Next year, we will be able to break out on the actual department level for all of the smaller departments as well. So the proposed changes are equal to about $2 million. And as you can see on the notes, and there's more detail in the presentation that we did at the budget workshop, but this is kind of just high level summarizing so you can see what some of those expenses are. So you can see that there's personnel increases, increased services, systems, proposed studies. The one change that we did make in the general fund was on the city council budget, and that was per Council President Garrett, and that was to reduce the council proposed budget by the 30,000 based on the study that would have shown that to be comparable, 5,000 increase per council member would have been justified. That amount was then used to increase the food and beverage amount by 30,000 so that when we do community grants, that would be available for use in the community. The other change that we made in the general fund, which you will see on the budget forms, is that we moved legal expenses of $186,000 from administration over to the council budget to be more transparent in where that money was coming from. Those are the only two changes on the expense side from what we presented to what we're reflecting today.
Many of those changes too, Tammy. Thank you.
Yes. Then looking at the fire department, which will now be in the general fund, but was in a separate fund in 2020, you can see that there's increases in personnel, operating, and services. Some of the changes that you'll see on the budget forms would be from one category to another. So an instance of that is in the fire department, where we had uniforms under personnel as part of their gear. And so now that has been moved over to operating to more accurately reflect that as an operating cost. In the Parks Department, you can see that the general, just a little bit in personnel increase, but the major change was in capital park projects. Again, this is the appropriated amount, and so it can change down from what is approved, but just not up without an additional appropriation. The parks and fire expense estimates. So you'll see on the budget forms these transfers. And so this is the cash balance if we were to receive all the revenues that we expect and to spend out all that we expected on the fire and parks. This may change, but this is how we get the forms to where they need to be. And these monies will be transferred over to the general fund to then support the parks and the fire department in that general fund. So these are just reflected as expenses, and then everything will be coming out of the general fund going forward. Public safety lit. So this is again the police and fire portions that we had shown under the police and fire department in the previous presentation. Because the revenues are not as significant of a decrease, if I had shown this before, it would have looked a lot different with less expenses over in the public safety lit, but we were able to utilize this income tax revenue. This is expected to decrease for the year 2022. And again, that's where that sustainability plan comes into play, because then that would then put more pressure on the general and the police funds going in 2022, but nothing that we can't manage. I'm sure that we can sustain any of these changes. Then looking at the MVH expenses, and note that under motor vehicle highway fund, that there is both the public works department and the stormwater departments under this category. And so you can see the huge capital costs in the motor vehicle highway and the sharing of services and capital. So something might have been categorized as services, or maybe they did engineering last year and then this year they're going to do capital. So there's a relationship there under public works for services and capital. And then looking at under stormwater, again, there's a proposed personnel, as Lance mentioned, that would be requested regardless of the DPW proposal. Looking at the police expense estimates, and again, this is a separate territory taxing district, and so that's why this one is pulled out separately. That you can see that there's personnel expenses, and again, just on the police fund, as I mentioned before, we moved additional salary over to the public safety lit, so you can see that there's a bit of a decrease there. You can also see that we have the proposed license plate readers and other expenses, as well as additional vehicles and equipment included in that capital line. Debt service expense estimates, the only change here is beyond the regular schedules is that the debt service for the 2019 park bonds were added. And so we have one payment of that due in 2021 to be paid for the first debt service that is on 1/1 of 2022, that we normally pay those in December. And then the cumulative capital development, you can see that this has a decrease. Again, this is that relationship that we can have between some of the other funds. And so in public works, for instance, the motor vehicle highway fund was up. This one, we have proposed a decrease of 205, but when you're looking at the public works department, streets department, then that's a shift that we can make. But we're just keeping these funds do roll over. And so the cumulative capital development will be able to accrue some more money because we are expending less in 2021. Cum Fire, this is again another instance where some expense was already budgeted in capital, but now it's being called out as services. And then there are 2 tankers that are proposed, if you recall from the previous presentation at the workshop, which makes up about that $390,000. Local road and street, there's no change. Those are set expenses that is what the fund can exceed or can maintain. Food and beverage, you can see that the current level is $464,000, and so we just bumped it up to an even plus that $30,000, and so $495 is the proposed appropriated amount, and $115,000 of that does go to the town hall payment, but the remainder would be able to be used for the community grants. The mayor is proposing that we go to a fair system for community applicants to be able to apply and receive those grants. And we're working on that for the 2020 year as well as the 2021 fiscal year. Cumulative capital improvement had not been appropriated in the past, but it does have appropriation available, cash balance available to be appropriated. And it's currently earmarked for town hall improvements. And then that's it. So let me know if you have any questions. Again, this is just the introduction, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any specific questions on any departments. I will quickly pull up the forms. And so these will be posted on Gateway on the 25th. The notice to taxpayers, you can see here, has a budget not to exceed. This is where there's an additional 5% included in this budget estimate column, as well as increased levy in order to make sure that we do not exceed these amounts upon adoption. So when I propose the numbers in the above slides, then they do not include that additional 5% that is held for this advertisement. So the picture that you had from the PowerPoint presentation is a more accurate representation, but we do this to make sure that we have accounted for everything. And if there's any changes that council wants, that we could still bring that into the information. So these documents currently have the proposed adopted. So if you look down at the Form 1s, it has something filled out in the adopted column, but that's just for our reference right now. Those numbers are able to be changed.
Amy, we still see your presentation. I don't know if you're trying to show anything else.
Yes, I can change that.
Tammy, I would just say this. I mean, it's just thank you so much. I mean, you've done, particularly as someone who's new to the council, you've made this really, really easy for us. And you've done, I can tell, I mean, besides just all the hard work, just the presentation alone has been very, very helpful. And I had a chance to look at it before the meeting. So thank you for all that. Remind me, fire and parks as well under general and not breaking it out. I mean, it's a huge line item. What's the rationale? I mean, I know all the numbers are all there, but why are we putting it in general?
So that gives us a little bit more flexibility with the cash funds, and also creates less confusion for both the council and the public. When we talk about moving pennies from one fund to another, the source of revenue for all of those funds is the same. So the main sources, as you saw on that revenue slide, are the property taxes and local income tax, and they serve the same areas, the same taxing districts. And so just to make it cleaner for everybody, that those would be combined so that we can accurately show the taxing district and be able to easily explain it going forward. Those cash balances, again, the council is the fiscal body and determines how that money is spent every year. So on a year-by-year basis. So I think someone mentioned, well, we're saving up for something, then what happens to that money? Well, the council determines every year where that money is spent regardless. And so it's just combining to streamline it to make it easier again for the public. So we can say the general fund is part of this taxing district, and these are the fund, or these are the departments, the functional areas that the general fund supports, right? So then someone will be like, well, why is police separated out? And so the answer would be that it's separated out because it serves a different area. Different taxing district pay into that than pay into the other ones. With parks, fire, and the rest of the general fund, it's all the same area.
Awesome.
Tammy, if we chose not to separate that out this budget go round, given all the changes that are going on, and leave them as their own entities, would that have any impact on the budget that you've proposed here?
It would just be a strain on my office and Crow to redo all of the paperwork. So it would just be additional cost.
It's just a paperwork thing, though. It's not
Yes,
a
absolutely.
dollar thing. Yeah,
Yep.
Got it.
Amy, related to this, then why were they partitioned out in the first place historically then? Because it looks like we're doing something that other municipalities are already doing by putting them under the general fund.
Mm-hmm.
That's the impression I'm getting. But do you know historically why they were separated out, what the purpose of that was?
I do not know. Sometimes fire might be separated out, and you can even look at the fund name and it says fire territory. So I believe at one time Zionsville had a fire territory, but now it doesn't, right? So a lot of this might be just left over from what had happened before and contracts and other things that were in place at that time. So by naming it the Fire Territory Fund, you know, that in of itself is not accurate today.
So Tammy, I just have a question about the big picture on this. I mean, the budget is increasing by $5 million, and we have a deficit of $2 million on this particular budget. I'm sensitive to the fact that, you know, we don't have all the revenue line items, you know, but in the past, when we've been when the proposed budget has been presented to the council, it's been within a few $100,000 of even, and then when the revenue comes in, we're obviously, you know, revenues exceed the expenses. Where is this $2 million going to come from?
Sure, we do have adequate cash balances. As you see, just between 2020 and 2021, we are projected to have at least $2 million more of revenue than expenses. And as I mentioned, that the local income tax, we got a special distribution in 2020, and that is not reflected in the number from 2020. And so someone made the comment, well, what do we do with that revenue? And the answer is it goes into the cash balance to be used in later years. And so that is not a actual picture, right? That's just a apples to apples when we presented the budget, but we do have cash, sufficient cash in order to cover that has been saved over the years in order to meet the capital needs of the town today.
Yeah, I guess that's my, when I look at the budget, what I'm struggling with is that's also been intentional over the years. Mm-hmm. It's been intentional to spend less and propose less than what we would anticipate in revenue, so that we would have cash balances, and so that we would not need to move money from one place to another and use that to cover a deficit. I just need to probably work through this. I'm only through page 11 of 61 from what we got this morning, so that maybe that will help me. I don't know, but that's I'll be honest, I was surprised to see a $2 million deficit in the budget. That was a surprise for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that there are capital projects and there are things in the budget that may not be spent, right? So if we have in there a capital project of 1.2 million, maybe we don't get invoiced that full amount in 2021, but we have to set the budget as if we were going to spend that money. Also, there are no encumbrances included in that 2020 to 2021 view as well. So when you're looking at the department, especially with public works, know that there was some encumbrances that carried over from 19 over to 20. So when you're looking at the actual spend for a year, and that's just how business was done in the past, then we are planning to spend more than those amounts in 2020. And so when you look at the 2020 compared to 2021, then you will see that difference. Another instance of that there are projects that are both in 2020 and in 2021 to get away from that encumbrance mindset, so that we can say this council is approving the claims for these amounts. And so that's a little bit different than what's been done in the past, knowing that there might be some things outside of it. But if departments were not sure if a project would be totally completed, then they went ahead and put that in the 2021 budget, so that when you're passing this budget, that you understand that these are the costs that you have said that will happen. And then again, that sustainability plan is going to become very important going forward, so you can monitor those cash balances. If you look at the Form 4Bs, and I can pull up the forms real quick for you and just explain some key things that you might be interested in looking at. So do you guys see the budget?
We see it, Tammy.
Great. So here is the advertisement, and the budget estimate is what shows the maximum that you will be able to adopt. So once we hit publish on Friday, the budget total will not exceed this $45 million. Note that this is higher than what I had shown on the presentation because this included the 5% that we're putting in here in case we need to move something around in the next few days. And the maximum for the levy, again, is this 14.6 million, and that is how the maximum that we'll be able to raise. Note that we still have not received our certified net assessed values. As Heather mentioned, we are still waiting and getting information in from the state, which makes this a little bit hard to tell you actual numbers, but these are the forms that we are required to publish at a set timeline, and so we have to follow those rules. In the budget form ones, you'll see a line called other, and that is the 5% placeholder, and you'll notice that it is in the published column but not the adopted column. So you can see that there's detail here of all the departments that had not been broken out in the general fund in the past, so that is a new enhancement. And let me see if I can find.
Hey, Tammy, this is Joe Culp. When you get a chance, I have a few questions.
Oh, absolutely.
Obviously, we all haven't got to go through all 61 pages yet,
Correct.
but new, just trying to figure out this whole process. So you mentioned under the food and beverage that folks would be presenting to receive their allocation out of the 300 and whatever $1,000. So this will be a Heather question as well after my first question. So how do I know who's presenting to receive those funds? Because from what I understand, the previous budgets had a line item, Boone EDC, Chamber of Commerce, ZYSA. So I assume those same people will be presenting to receive money out of those funds.
Correct. They would be eligible to apply for those funds.
Is that in this budget?
Yes. No. It would be it's a pool of dollars that the council is going to approve. As the fiscal body, the council sets the appropriated amount for, and then those are the limits that the town operates under, right?
All
Those
right.
fiscal limits. Mhm.
So in the past, maybe Jason and Josh can, and then Brian can answer this. Those organizations would have been under a line item on here, correct?
Correct.
Correct. Although
So
we
like-
have, go ahead, Joe.
Well, my question is, let's say, for instance, Jason, myself, any of the council persons would have a group that they would like to present. And then there's no money left. How do I know who's presenting and where that money is going to be allocated to? And I guess sorry.
The mayor will be putting together a committee to determine the granting of the community grant application funding.
So is that something that will be done before we approve the budget?
No.
Correct.
Yeah, and maybe, so I think what the mayor's proposing in this budget is that instead of what we've done historically, which is appropriate dollars for specific organizations as part of the budget or later as part of an additional appropriation if they came, mid-year, for example, with a request, that those same dollars would be repurposed into a fund, and then the mayor would create a grant program and the administration would decide, how those grants would be allocated, to individual organizations that might apply for the grant program. But it would not come back before the council, and the council would not necessarily have a say in that process. It would be, we're basically taking those dollars that have previously been individually appropriated, moving them into a bucket that becomes a grant program with an application process and review. Tammy, did I? summarize that
So
correctly.
that brings up a question. And the reason I asked that is because Jason and I were both on groups that didn't get funded that were on a line item in the previous year. So my question to Heather is are we approving buckets or are we approving line items?
Well, last year you approved individual line items of appropriations. If the mayor's administration hasn't allotted those items out, they haven't spent that money, you know, that's something that we can address with the mayor and the administration, because you have appropriated the dollars. This time, the proposal would be for 2021, there would not be individual line items. It would be moved into a bucket, and that bucket would become a grant that the mayor's administration would administer.
Okay, and is that for all of these different buckets or just that food and beverage?
So the proposal is the food and beverage monies that have previously been used for community organizations, I believe, Tammy.
Yeah, I guess what I mean is when I go through this, as I'm learning, and is that any of these specific areas that we are approving, let's say, for instance, they try to buy, or they want to buy 3 tankers instead of 2 tanks, whatever it was there earlier. Is that something that has to be approved through us, or can that dollars be moved from somewhere else and be proposed without having to go through us?
Yeah, so I think what you're asking, for example, is if there was a larger general appropriation, for example, in administration, where you're taking Parks and Rec and fire department, adding it to administration, you know, there is more flexibility, and Tammy mentioned that earlier in the presentation, when you're within a fund. So you can sort of move money from here and put it over here, you know, within the fund. You cannot move money in between the funds, meaning the police department needs to be spent for the police department fund. So once you appropriate those monies there, you can move them around for what they're spent on within the department. You just can't move them back and forth. And Tammy, do you want to elaborate on that? I'm not a finance person, but that's, you know, it's sort of fund accounting. So you create these buckets by department. And so when you see those individual funds, the flexibility is given within the fund, not between the funds.
And yes, definitely within the funds. And the 4 main categories, well, 5 if you include debt service, but personnel, supplies, operating, and personnel, operating, services, and capital are the 4 main categories. And so when council adopts the budget, they are adopting money per those categories. Within those categories, then we can move, my finance office can move between those categories not within the categories, between the lines within a category. So from office supplies to operating supplies. So we can make that move back office because the council approved those high level categories. And then for the between categories, that would require council approval. So if we wanted to move from capital to personnel, we would have to go and ask council. So those are the main differences. Now we are going to a new financial system, hopefully, and that's also included in the budget. And part of that process is going through and creating unique and setting up the chart of accounts with unique codes. So how things were detailed out in the past don't necessarily make sense in a financial system going forward. So that's why those are, it would just be the promotional line in the food and beverage fund. Now, I want to also mention that within this committee that the mayor is planning to form, she is planning on including 1 to 2 council members in that committee. And so please reach out to her if you're interested in that, or President Garrett, make sure to talk to her about that so that there is some input from council on that committee on how those dollars are going to be spent and not just the dollar amount of those funds.
Do you know how many people will make up that committee?
No, that is still in the works. And so
one or two is good if it's a 3 to 5 person committee, but if it's a 7 person committee, that doesn't really do much.
Correct. So just a fair objective process in order to make sure that those funds are given to quality applicants.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick question. This is Brad. And thank you for asking that, Brian. I had the same question. Obviously, without pulling back the whole budget, is the dollar allocation from this year to last year the same, other than the process being different, or is there a change in terms of available funds for that committee to look at?
So the amount actually increased by a little over $30,000.
Because of Josh's move from the proposal. Okay.
And if you look at the Form 4Bs on the financial statements, those show the expected cash balances of the funds. So the operating balance, that might be also a place that you guys want to look. So we currently have the fund for the food and beverage. I believe it ends with 150,000. And so that lets you know whether or not we're spending down that fund, right? So we're in COVID times, and I know you guys the council wants to support the local businesses. And so we are appropriating adequate in order to do that while still maintaining that does fund a debt service, a service, that town hall payment. So we want to make sure that no matter what, we can still make that payment. And so we're again, looking at that sustainable process.
What's the benefit, unless there's something that was, that happened that shouldn't have in terms of legitimacy? What's the benefit of the committee? I mean, are y'all concerned that the groups that were previously allocated funds were not spending them wisely? I mean, what's the benefit to have this new oversight where it hasn't been before? Maybe there's been a problem with dollars being spent in an inefficient or illegal or whatever it might be fashion.
I'm not aware of a specific issue, but it does go to accountability, especially during COVID and other things, right? So we want to look at the financial stability and what programs are being proposed to make sure that the funds that are given are not fully supporting the operations. And if that funding were to stop, as the council makes that decision every year, we want to make sure that this is helping the organizations.
Yeah, you had made the comment that that the committee is currently being formed for 2021 and 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because the people that we approved money for in 2020 are going to have to go through the process to get the money by the end of the year?
I think there is a want to make this a fair process. And since those were set by the previous council, we want to make sure that this council is on board with what those expenses will be.
That's not how it works. The council approved the budget last year for this year. That's how it always works. So that doesn't fly at all. This council will, in 3 years, approve a budget for the following council. If we just didn't pay anything because the prior council approved it, nothing would get done. Before I'll turn it back over to you, Jason, but I got a few things that I just need to get off my chest here. $2 million deficit won't fly, especially if we're going to sweep balances from the fire and parks into the general fund, because while we're saying transparency, that doesn't look very transparent to me, because that looks like we can take money from what we've been saving for in other departments to spend on this deficit. The town hall improvements, I'm not sure what we need to improve. I mean, that's only $100,000, but it's a brand new town hall. To say that when we were asked, or when it was mentioned earlier, that to keep the fire and parks in their own fund buckets would cost additional money. I'm sorry, but to me, it seems like the budget process has been a pretty substantial waste of money as it is, because we haven't had our voices heard as the council. We haven't been involved. We could have kept you from wasting a bunch of money and time if we would have been more involved in the ideas of pooling those buckets. We got Jason, to his credit, has been sitting here looking through the budget. I haven't even bothered to open it because, we get it at 7:13 for a 7:30 meeting. That doesn't, also the ZYSA, they have $50,000 they were banking on that was approved by the town council that is for safety and capital improvements. Without that on this budget, that's a big problem for me. The chamber historically has had the funding approved going in, so they know what they've got to work with for the following year. I want to see that in there. There's a lot of issues with this budget, so I hate that it's going to cost more money. But if we had been brought into the loop earlier, we could have saved a lot of expense there. That's my 2 cents. No questions. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note for the other, 23 people who are watching this, not just the council members, that, the reality is in the past we have over budget, or we have under budgeted intentionally so that departments had money to do capital projects. So, it's not a surprise when, when we know we need a new firehouse that, there's money in the fire department budget and cash balance so that we can utilize some of those funds. It's not a surprise that, roundabouts are going in 2020 and 2021 because we've been working that in for the last 2 and 3 years. I mean, in my time on the council, this will be my fourth budget that I voted on. Last year was a little eye-opening for me because we were within a couple of $1 million from being even. And to your comment earlier, Tammy, that once this money comes in, then that kind of, then we know what we're getting from the state, and we've been, historically under budget, and those dollars have been used for other projects or capital improvements and to save money. I don't understand. I have no doubt that the software and the stuff that we've seen here is better than the line-by-line Excel documents we've received in the past. But at least the line-by-line Excel documents in the past let us know where money was going and how it was going to be moved from place to place. I'm obviously, to Brian's point, I'm happy to work on this budget and help as much as we possibly can. But to be included in the 11th hour, finally in the budget process, is a little disheartening.
Amy, would you mind promoting both Tim Berry from Crow and Mayor Styron as well, just in case they have any questions or comments on this? I think this dialogue is helpful. And while that's happening, Tammy, I do have a quick question. You were mentioning earlier in terms of the funds and moving around the funds, and again thinking about the fire in the parks. There's a 101 general fund that proposed those are being moved to. In practice, I'm not saying this is the concept, but in practice, if they were in the general fund, then you would be able to move those funds within those 4 categories independently. So if you wanted to move, I don't know, from not that you would do this, but like from supplies from the fire department to supplies in the parks department, that move could happen. Is that a correct statement?
That would go before council.
So even though they're both in the same fund.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
so I guess that's really my question is then if I look at this detail, I sort of see, you sort of mentioned not moving between funds, and I've got this 101 general fund that's called $17 million. Is each one of those line items within the 101 general item then sort of, you can move it within that line item, but not
Per department.
items? Per department, I got you. So you can move it around within the fire department, but you couldn't move it from department to department. Got it, okay, that makes sense. And I see Tim Berry nodding his head yes as well.
So
Councilors, we have Tim Berry from, yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
Just for my edification, when you have cash balances, those stay within the different fund areas. They don't go into a general cash balance. And when we're looking at cash balances, say for spending into it, how healthy is our cash balance across the different funds? Is that spelled out in the budget that we received? I
So
wouldn't
those would
think
be
so, but-
reflected in the Form 4Bs. And so on that packet, it would be the towards the end of the packet. There are Form
Okay,
4Bs,
thank
and
you.
then there's current year worksheet and debt worksheets.
Thank
Is
you.
a Form 4B like a balance sheet, basically?
It is. It is absolutely. It's the 18-month budget, taking into account what we're going to spend and receive for the last 6 months of the year, as well as what we expect to spend and receive for the 2021 year.
Tammy or Tim, I'll open
Thank
this sort
you.
of in sort of a, I guess a general concern I have is you know, as Councilor Plunkett was sort of talking about saving, we traditionally save and kind of save for a rainy day. And if you look at the news, it's raining. What's interesting to me though is that the revenue doesn't show that for next year. And I know that's not determined by you, right? That's determined by the state. Traditionally, if we think back to 2008, for example, the financial crisis, if you think about government accounting and payouts, is there a long tail between bad news and it reflecting in the revenue number, and probably a long tail in good news and reflecting in the revenue number? And if there is, I guess I'm a little concerned about the amount of OpEx that we're adding in this budget being spent then with cash on the capital projects, being that there's a long tail potentially coming down the pipe. So Tim, I don't know if you or Tammy have any insight into, we've talked about sustainability plans, and I think that's an excellent idea, but we don't have one here. What's coming that we don't know about, that if we spend a bunch of cash now to cover OpEx, so we're therefore spending capital cash, but we don't have that in the future when we have lower revenues that we then can't spend on capital because we have so much more OpEx? It's a long tangential question. Does that make sense?
I can start things off in a more general tone, and then Tammy can fill in more detail with respect to Zionsville specific information. What we're seeing in this economic period that we're in currently is a little different than what we saw in the 08-09 period. Back then, one of the challenges, and quite frankly, what led to the recession, was a real estate crisis. And so we saw decreasing assessed values and market values coming out of that period of time, which certainly hurt the revenue streams and the pressure on tax rates with respect to local governments in the state of Indiana. As you know, your funding source comes from two primary places: property taxes and income taxes, your local income tax. So we do not see at this point that same pressure on the real estate market, though we certainly are watching it more on the commercial side. Residential prices still remain very strong. We're certainly watching commercial values and the impact that that may have, lessening demand on retail, that may have some pressures on downward movement on assessed values on the commercial side. As it relates to income tax, the way Indiana collects local income taxes and distributes those local income taxes, as we discussed last week, we got the estimate from the state of Indiana for income tax distributions for 2021. Those will be confirmed by the end of the month. It is expected that there will not be substantial changes between what they released last week and what will be solidified later this month for your 2021 distributions. Because the way they collect taxes and distribute those, there is typically an 18 to 24 month delay that local governments would see on any reduction in income tax collections and then distributions to the local governments. So if you were to see a reduction in income tax and any impact on this economic climate that we are in today with income tax, you would then begin seeing that in your 2022 and 2023 distributions.
And Tim, real quick, with that income tax, that calculation is not sophisticated enough to go down to the taxing authority, meaning just Zionsville. So even if Zionsville were to be spared some of that income tax reduction, if there was income tax reduction in other parts of Boone County, that in theory could also impact us. Is that a correct statement?
They certainly
We're effectively a donor. We're a donor community in the county.
They are certainly becoming much more sophisticated in the way that the state is able to make those calculations. The state of Indiana currently is in the process of developing and implementing a new revenue processing system that will allow much more sophistication in how those calculations are compiled. Traditionally, your statement is correct, though.
Councilors, questions on that, or does that all make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense that we would really see the hit in 2022, knowing that the taxes were late this year, but they're pre-revenues before, COVID crisis. So technically, we probably should be in a decent shape. But just to answer, so Tim or Tammy, based on again, I haven't had a chance to look through all of it. Are we projecting? I mean, I know there's some extra dollars that were there, and we said 5 million, and there was maybe 2 million. Is there a projected unknown revenue stream that's missing of about $3 million in this particular budget right now? And if so, what is the risk? And I know, Tammy, you were kind of saying the way dollars come in, you probably felt like we were going to meet that. Obviously, you wouldn't want to propose a budget that's not going to be met. What is the risk, though, that those funds would not come in and we would be sitting on a $2 million deficit, not even counting, I get to Jason's point and others, that it'd be nice to have money to roll over, but to even just meet the budget, is there a risk that we wouldn't?
Those revenues are set. So for example, on building permits, when I ask Wayne what his building permit number is, I cut it. I think I have 80% of what we're expecting for the building permits, because we just can't predict what the state legislature or someone will do, especially with COVID still out there, and you don't know the market. And so we do have those under what we expect them to come in as. So there's a few $100,000 here, a few $100,000 there, in order to make up some of that gap. And again, on the expenses, we don't expect to spend every dollar that is appropriated either.
Tammy,
I might add real quickly, one of the challenges that Tammy has had in putting together these numbers is that while Boone County did certify some net assessed valuations recently within the last 2 weeks, we have reason to believe that the value that they certified was incorrect. It actually showed a increase of assessed value in Zionsville of, I believe, close to 40%. And so we have questioned that, as has Tammy, and there is not a final answer yet on that. But as you go through the budget process, that number should be solidified to help determine what that impact would be on and the budget that you would have, that impact would have on your tax rate. As you know, as we've discussed previously, Zionsville has one of the lowest or on the bottom end of tax rates for comparable communities in the area when we look at Boone, Hamilton, and Hendricks counties.
Tammy, when we were at the budget, when we were at the budget workshop, Tammy, Tim sort of provided that good news to us that you had sort of anticipated much lower revenue. Is the budget that was presented today reflective then of that now higher revenue that's been certified, or is there still
Yes.
money? Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Sorry, Brad.
Yeah, we were able to update the budget this weekend with those increased numbers, and then therefore moved all the moved some expenses from the general and the police funds over to that. So all those forms have been updated.
No, it's just my first go around, so I don't know, what this looked like. Obviously, Josh, you do, and Brian, and even Jason to a degree. It feels like there's a difference though in terms of in the past, the numbers, we were more conservative in terms of thinking about these are the dollars we know. Obviously, no one's 100% in terms of what's going to come in or what's going to be spent. There's always that, but the budget didn't project a difference there. And this time we're saying, hey, we could be wrong. There could be some dollars that aren't going to be spent. There's probably more money coming in. I don't know. I guess, in terms of the work that I'm doing outside of my volunteer work here, we got to be much tighter than that. Of course we never know exactly what's going to come in, but we're always err on the side of caution and not create a budget that would require us to try to find dollars if worst case scenario, we didn't get those savings or dollars didn't come in the way they were wanting to. So it just feels like maybe there's a difference. And if that's the way we've always done it, then I'm along for the ride. But it just feels like maybe people are struggling with a different approach that's just not as conservative.
I guess along that line, with Councilor Burke's concerns, if we know, so I have some concerns because we're looking at 2021 now, but if we're expecting downstream, or not downstream, if we're expecting that we're going to have decreased revenues in 2022 and 2023 from the decrease in lit, then should we not be even more conservative now, knowing that several years down the road, we are going to have decreased revenue, instead of being a little more aggressive or liberal in the way our spending is allocated presently? So I'm having trouble wrapping my heads around that. And like Brad, I look towards the three counselors who've been on here before, and to you, Tammy, and to the mayor, as to how we allocate this. But just from a personal standpoint of, if I knew from my family's budget that we were going to make less money a few years down the road, we cut back starting now as to what we're going to be spending, so that we don't get into a crisis down the road.
Thank you. So I would say that you mentioned on the operating balance, so the cash balances, and in the general fund on the Form 4B, you'll see that the ending cash balance, if we were to spend every dollar in 2020 and 2021, we would end up with $8.2 million as a funding balance in those in that category alone. And I do understand on the sustainability, but I do also see that there is a level of service that we are not providing to the citizens. And this budget will bring us to that status that we should be. So when the departments were asked to propose a budget, the question was asked, what do you need to run your department in order to serve the citizens? And this is the proposal that they came back with. And again, we will monitor cash balances. We will continuously update on COVID information and reductions in revenues through the year. We will create the sustainability plan that will make sure that any of the operating costs, especially with the personnel, that those are sustainable in the future. And we will go forward with a plan like that. Now, capital expenses like a roundabout, then those are one-time expenses that are included in this budget that, next year, maybe we won't have a big project. In 2022, maybe there won't be a big project like that. And then you'll see that reduction, and then our revenues will increase, because typically the revenues do increase year over year. Property taxes, as Tim mentioned, are not expected to go down. They are expected to go up. That is a sustainable source of revenue for the town. And luckily that is right now immune to COVID. And so we do have streams in place as our building permit process enhances with new technology and customer service to the citizens in the building community, then that will also help to increase that activity. One of the things that we will be doing before the end of the year is proposing new fee schedules. So those fee schedule updates and increases are not reflected in the budget today either. So we do anticipate additional revenue sources that we are not counting on because we can't predict, but those will be included and we hope to receive in more revenue than what you're seeing today on that one slide.
I have a quick question. So we talk a lot about the roundabout. Is that the north-south connector roundabout? Is that what we're talking about?
I have to ask Lance.
Might be the Kissel Road one, isn't
Kissel
it?
Road. I think it's Kissel.
Okay.
North-south one, I think, was in 2020.
All right, I just checking. I wanted to make sure we put a location on that. Second question is, if we're talking about doing the grant from the food and beverage, if we're talking about doing the grant funds through the approval process that the mayor is putting together, how are we going to do that? Because we didn't budget that bucket of money for 2020. So how would we go back and do that for 2020 now?
So that bucket is determined by the DLGF. Again, you have the personnel, you have services, you have operating, and you have capital. So all of those lines are currently in services. And so that is the authority that was granted during the budget process.
You're talking about for last year, right, Brian?
Yeah, I'm talking about like the budget for 2020. So we don't have to do anything to move that money or approve that money. It's just there for
Correct.
the taking.
But can I ask a question about that? So I know that the council last year, though, Tammy, appropriated to specific organizations. So I don't think it seems to me that you couldn't just move from something that was appropriated for, I don't know, Zionsville Chamber of Commerce, for example, into a grant program without some other reappropriation to a different fund.
Tim, so we follow the rules.
Because we didn't give it to just food and beverage line item. It was given to organizations in the budget. That's my confusion, I guess, Brian, to your question. Sorry to jump in on that.
No, thank you.
I'm just aware of the State Board of Accounts and the Department of Local Government Finance rules, which state that within those categories, they can be spent however. So they're all in that services line. So I'm not aware of a restriction beyond that.
Can I jump in just for a second? I think there's a misconception with regard to the Zionsville Chamber funding. There isn't a line item for the Zionsville Chamber this year. However, the Zionsville Chamber has historically been reimbursed for all of their marketing costs. And that goes back to when Julie was the chamber director. And those expenses have been reimbursed this year as well. There's been no change with regard to the current support for the Zionsville Chamber as compared to previous years. I do want to point out that the budget that you are receiving today, it is the mayor's administration proposing it to you for approval. And last year's budget was the mayor's administration providing you a budget for approval at that point. Because there was a transition through the election between the last mayor and this mayor, it is historically normal for a new mayor to come in and take a minute to take a look at what were the priorities that were set forth in the previous administration and line it up with the priorities that candidate that now is the mayor set out during her campaign, and one that was supported by the voters. Fortunately, there has been so much in terms of what we've all aligned on, both council and my team, with regard to how we move forward with managing our resources and our efforts. And there's been a few areas where because of COVID and because of just wanting to get a better, clear sense of what the community opportunities are, as well as the needs, we have delayed payment on 2 of the line items that had been specifically identified in last year's budget. As you recall, maybe you didn't follow my campaign too much, but one of the things that really drove me to run for mayor was economic development, and some of the areas where we just really hadn't gained the same traction in that of other communities that surround us. It gave me pause to think about paying an organization another year of payments for economic development help when both the deputy mayor and I have so many contacts and experiences with economic development ourselves. We really wanted to give our own team a chance to see what we could do to turn around what had frankly been a not a very successful economic development strategy. That does not mean that we don't have some support that we provided to the Boone County Economic Development Council. However, we did end up providing them just the same amount of money as was budgeted. It just went towards targeted COVID relief programs, which is what our community really could use more specifically this year. So there is flexibility with regard to how we spend allocations of budget, and that's a good thing. It helps us be more nimble. It helps us address the actual current needs that our community has had. And until just recently, we've had very good conversations and partnership with council on just about everything. And I am hopeful that we will continue to move down that direction, which is one reason why I want to have a small group of folks to really take a look at what community grant opportunities really serve this time in this era for our community. And I am looking forward to working with you on that as we move forward. So thank you for the opportunity to address you on this. I appreciate it.
Tammy, I have a quick question. I haven't looked at the budget yet, obviously, with Mr. Trailer over there. I really excited about the Gateway project. Is that money allocated in there at all for that project, and how much is it?
Yes, if we look at the budget workshop under the planning department, the amount that was allocated for the Gateway study is $41,000, and that is included in the total proposal.
Okay, so that's just the assessment or the figuring out what to do. But if it's proposed that we put a parking lot in, or we want to buy the land across the street, or the FC Tucker building, or whatever, that's not in there, correct?
Correct. So that would either be a 2022 budget item, or someone would come before you to do an additional appropriation for that.
So,
or it would be found within the existing line items within the appropriation.
Okay, because and maybe that's an offline question, but I know that people in my district, which includes the village, are curious to see what's going to happen with the parking lots that are all at the entry of our town. And is that something that we're going to have something in place by the end of 2021, or is that going to be taking 2021 to put the entire long-term process together?
No.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're going to work on that fast, Joe.
Okay, cool.
I share your
Good.
same, desire to move quickly.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm excited about it, so that's good.
I echo that excitement, and I think that's the benefit of all of us working together to row in the same direction, right? So what the mayor was talking about earlier about us working well and hoping to continue to work well, absolutely, that's what we should be doing. By the way, there's no vote on this. This is just a first opportunity to to present from administration? Those are all been very good questions. I'm not certainly ending questions if there's more, but there will be additional opportunity here, certainly when you guys all digest it, to ask questions, whether it's in a public forum, or I know that you can always reach out to Tammy or the mayor or deputy mayor if you've got questions as well. So any other questions here?
If things don't get, if the fire and parks don't get moved under general, does this have to be done before it gets submitted to the gateway portal on Friday?
Yes, that is correct.
So if we are going to redo this, much to Councilor Traylor's point, this needs to be done in the next couple of days. And how do we actually, as a council, determine that without a vote or a reassessment of the budget?
Heather,
President Garrett, do you have?
Yeah, I mean, Heather, can you talk about that process? What's submitted, I think, is not the final budget on Friday.
Yeah.
It's just the public budget. But I'll let you.
Yeah, so Tammy, please correct me. I'd like you to weigh in on this too, but the council does have throughout this process, the ability to move, change appropriation amounts, have input in the structure of the budget, priorities of the budget. It's obviously a negotiation between, the mayor's presented budget and what you finally adopt. Tammy, you said no earlier on changing the departments in terms of the structure of the budgets. You want to talk about that in terms of?
So on the publication for the 25th, we need to identify the funds. So each of the funds, and then the maximum amount to be raised by levy. So the property tax amount per fund. So if we were to keep fire fund and the parks fund separate, we would need to then allocate the property taxes as well as the local income tax, which again are the funding sources for those, over to those funds, as well as identify the budget amount, which we have. That's just right now under the general fund. For the budget public hearing, I will prepare for you and I get it to you ahead of time, the allocation of a tax bill. And so you would be able to see when a person that has a $250,000 home, then they're going to pay this much into the parks fund, fire fund, police, or not fund, but department, regardless of the fund that it's in. And so I think showing that kind of information, and again, when we have a transparency portal internally, then we'd be able to share that with the public as well, to be able to show those allocations that no matter what. And Tim, you can weigh on this one, but I believe one of the other benefits of moving the fire fund and the parks fund into the general fund is that it maximizes our ability to transfer into the rainy day fund, because that's based on the general fund numbers. And so we had talked about having that $8.2 million cash balance. And if we wanted to increase our rainy day fund for future bond ratings and just to general security, then we would want to move money from the general fund into that rainy day fund.
Yeah, so Councilor Choi and others, I mean, now is the time if people feel strongly, even though we're not taking a vote, if you feel strongly that those funds should be separated, at least, voice those now between now and Friday.
I think just for the record, I want to make sure that goes on record. I did voice that. I don't want them pooled into the general fund. There's a lot about this I don't want, but that's very important.
I would agree. I would go on record with Councilor Traylor. I would like for them to remain separate.
Heather, I know we're not
my
obliged.
concern.
Go ahead, Alex.
My problem is that I don't know the full ramification of this. I've got two of my co-counselors saying that they don't want to move in. I don't fully understand myself why to move it in or not to move it in. So until in 5 days to kind of try to figure this out doesn't seem like an adequate amount of time. But that's my concern around it and my frustration.
Are there any counselors that are adamant that we should move these in? Okay. Tammy, I think this is much a timing thing as anything else. It's not a rejection of the concept, but I tend to agree. I don't know all the details. I shouldn't say that. I don't know all the ramifications of doing it, positive or negative, to know if it's a good idea or a bad idea or what. It probably is a good idea if you guys are proposing it, but I just don't know. So I would plan on not doing that for Friday unless any counselor really objects here. I know it's extra work, but I think just in the air of taking the right steps at the right pace, that might be the best approach. Heather, Councilor Choi had another question, and I think it's a very valid question. How do we as a council, or how should we, I guess I should say, as a council, do that sort of look at this budget and say, well, this is what we want, this is what we don't want, because obviously we can't do that as a quorum without open door rules. And what's the timing to do that piece of saying, gee, we should have $50,000 more in police, or $20,000 less in this. Is that in the next council meeting that we do that? Is that a special public meeting we should do that? I don't want to do it over email because I think that just does the same thing in terms of violating open door laws.
Right. I mean, traditionally, I know the council's been more involved in sort of the planning of the budget before it gets to this point. So, at this point, I would look through what Tammy sent this morning, send any comments to her. You're welcome to copy me so we can keep kind of a record of requests from the council, and happy to do that. We could, you do have some opportunity if you wanted to hold publication or make that request. You could call a special meeting. I understand Tammy's backed that into our 2 public meetings that were previously scheduled. So under what we have currently calendared for the month of October, she has to publish it by the 25th, or we won't meet that 10-day public hearing notice requirement that's required by statute. The only opportunity, to delay sort of publication on Friday is to set a special meeting between now and October 11th, which I think is the date that would be required as the sort of last drop dead date that you could do that. But then you're going to need to set, 2 special meetings to be able to complete it by November the 1st, which is the requirement under the statute.
And why would you need 2 special meetings? Why could you not just do it on the 2nd? Could we do it in a way that we set a special meeting? It didn't have to set a 2nd special meeting.
Yeah,
also, let's remember we've got fall break in October as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at your calendar. You would be pretty tight. So if you, let's say, I'm just making this up on the fly, so please don't hold me to this, but October 11th is, a Sunday. So technically that's the last, day. And obviously we're not going to have a meeting on a Sunday. So if you even looked at doing it on October the 9th, which is a Friday.
Friday of fall break. So let's say
right. You would then, have your Monday morning meeting, which would be your final adoption on the 19th, give you 10 days in between. So you could do that without calling 2 special meetings. It would be, a little bit tighter, but the key is making sure that the public has notice and that they get that 10 days prior to the initial, public hearing on the budget before, so that they have an opportunity to review and weigh in.
My concern with just saying, hey, email Tammy your thoughts and comments, is it puts her in an untenable position of saying, well, gee, Councilor Plunkett wants to cut $100,000 from this fund, but Councilor Traylor wants to add $100,000 to this fund. So what do I do? I don't feel that's an efficient approach, because I can't imagine all 7 councilors will agree on what should and shouldn't be done. So my preference would be to do something that allows us to do that. And I would imagine with the mayor, This is her budget, and let her argue for things she wants and let us argue for things that we think we want. So I think my approach would be to delay that publication and have a special meeting, but I want to be conscious of everyone's time. If there's a different approach that counselors want to take, I'm open to that as well. But I hate to kick the can down the road, but I think we just need a little more time to digest a lot of this and make the right calls. Any concerns, counselors, with having a special meeting? Heather, at that point, so let's just think through a schedule here. That would be a special meeting on the 8th, or would we want to do it sooner than that so that there's additional time just in case there is some disagreements?
It may be helpful, to talk with you and Tammy, or, as well, about the schedule. But I think what you're asking, if I'm listening correctly, and Tammy had nod, is that we have another meeting like this to go through the budget after you've had a chance to digest it before it's published, so that we are more closely aligned before we give notice to the taxpayer on how we want the budget to be presented to the state as our sort of introduced budget, if you will. So if you wanted to do that and you didn't publish on Friday, and I'd want to take some time to work with Tammy and kind of back into this calendar, make it sure it aligned with the deadlines. You could have maybe a special meeting next Monday, for example, and then we would have to have a second special meeting for the initial public hearing, and you could still wrap it up by your October 19th meeting for final adoption. But that would still, because I don't think you want to wait. I think what you're asking is, can you have more public dialogue about the budget, bring back any concerns, issues, questions, requests?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm looking for this to sink in and council to have, to put it in my computer terms, read-write access to the budget and not read access. I mean, I saw this detail 17 minutes before this meeting. That's not enough time to say this is yes, no, indifferent. And I don't think the other counselors, so we need time to absorb it. We need time to discuss it, I don't know, and Heather, do we propose our own budget back? I want to be, figure out what's the best process.
Well, yeah, obviously it's best to work in the context of the budget that was presented because of all the varying requirements for revenues and buckets and how monies can be spent, like the local income tax and the public safety lit have to be spent on specific purposes. So, I guess the other option, and I'm just kind of making this up on the fly, I'm looking at Tammy, she's middle of my screen, but is whether or not you could just have a second budget workshop. I mean, obviously that would be, having that, I think, would maybe be constructive, maybe even more so than a second public, or, than a public special town council meeting, just because then you can actually sit down with Tammy and kind of go section by section through what's been proposed and provide, input at that time. If you still had public concerns, then obviously, you can do that as part of the process, but.
Well, and if I think about the questions the council have been asking, they've been less about how it's being spent as to how much is being spent. And if that could be accomplished in a budget workshop, that's certainly fine. I want to make sure that council is signing off on the dollar amounts that council feels is prudent financially for the town. And so we can certainly talk about this offline as well this afternoon and come up with a schedule and a proposal if councilors are okay with that, or if you want to continue to have this discussion right now, I have no problem with that. I'm not trying to.
Yeah, I'm happy, not to put Tammy on the spot, I'm happy to give Tammy a call on your behalf, following this meeting, and kind of look at the dates and the options and maybe present something back. I'm thinking, Tammy, just out loud, that maybe a second budget workshop would be the most productive and helpful at this point.
Yeah, I just think we want time to digest, time to weigh in. I don't think anyone wants to miss the deadlines because that sort of goes back to the old budget, but we want to make sure that we're contributing to what is best. So council, is that okay for Heather and Tammy to go back and make sure that we're staying within a schedule, knowing that those are kind of the parameters of giving us time to adjust this and time to give input and time to make some changes and then go through the normal process otherwise that's been proposed? Any objections to that?
No, I think we have to, but I mean, I think we all need to be prepared to be pretty flexible on gathering again pretty quickly. So sooner we can get some calendars together, the better.
Yeah, correct. I would agree with that, Brad. Just not too soon so that people have a chance to digest what's a lot of information over the next 3 or 4 days. So we'll figure that out though, as well. With that, unless there's any other questions, I've been watching a lot of counselors drinking a lot of coffee. I'm going to propose we have a 5-minute break in this meeting. So it's 9:26. We'll reconvene at 9:31, and then we'll get through the rest of the new agenda items. So see you in 5 minutes. another minute here. I see videos popping back on.
Josh, is that jelly beans?
What that I'm eating?
Yeah.
No, it's a banana with peanut butter. Although
nice.
ironically,
I know what that smells like.
you can't even see it. I've got a giant thing of jelly beans right here on my table.
Nice.
Yeah, I got banana and hard-boiled eggs. It's not an exciting breakfast. I think we're all right. Well, it's 9:32. I'm sure Councilor Choi will join us back here momentarily, but I'm going to go ahead and get started here because I know we're already 2 hours in here. Okay. Next on new business is a consideration of an ordinance vacating a portion of a public right-of-way, the town of Hamilton Holiday Farms, Henke. This is a public hearing and also a first reading. This is ordinance number 2020-10. Mr. Gilmore, I see that you've been promoted here. Maybe if you can go over with us what this is about and the process around this.
Very good, sir. Thank you, President Garrett and members of the council. This item and the next item on your agenda both deal with vacations of plats. So before I get too far into the specific details of this one regarding the Henke development, I'd like to take a very brief moment just to explain what the platting process is, how that works, and then how things are changed. Some of you may be familiar with it, but I just want to make sure we're all starting with the same understanding. If you would imagine a whiteboard, which many of us have in our offices, that whiteboard represents a tract of land that you or someone else owns. At some point, the owner of that tract of land wants to develop it for a residential purpose, residential subdivision. I will stay with residential because that is what applies in these two cases that you're going to be discussing. On that whiteboard, you're going to lay out the streets, you're going to lay out the location of the lots, any easements to provide utilities to the lots. You may even include what are called CCRs, or conditions, covenants, and restrictions that would apply to this plat. It is going to be then reviewed by town staff to make sure that not only it works in its design, but it also fits then within the uses surrounding it for connectivity and things of that nature. Once it is approved by the staff and finally approved by the Plan Commission, the official document, which is referred to as a secondary plat, is recorded. At that time, the location of the lots are established, the location of the streets are established, easements are established so that buyers of those individual lots are assured of what they are going to be purchasing. As time goes by, some things may want to be changed or modified. To do that, there are a number of different avenues to do that. And in this case, now I'll start to get into the details first for the Henke proposal. Back in 1838, a plat for the town of Hamilton was established on Michigan Road, roughly where Willow Road intersects and crosses Michigan Road. It laid out at that time lots and public streets. This area, or at least a portion of the town of Hamilton, is now where Section 4 of Holiday Farms is proposed to be developed. Well, Holiday Farms is going to need to record their own plat, and a piece of ground cannot have two plats existing on it at the same time. So what we need to do is first vacate that portion of the town of Hamilton that is being impacted by the proposed Section 4 of Holiday Farms. I will also add a little bit on the history of the town of Hamilton. The section that we are talking about today is the last remaining remnant of the town of Hamilton. All other portions of the town of Hamilton have been vacated and developed by, give me just a moment, by Brittany Chase and by Austin Oaks and proper development to the south, Brentwood. So the section that we are talking about today is the last remaining portion of the town of Hamilton. To erase or move lots that are platted, Indiana State Code and our own Zionsville Subdivision Control Ordinance has developed, and again, I'm going to ask you to think back to the whiteboard with the drawing of the subdivision on it. State Code and our Subdivision Control Ordinance have two erasers to erase different parts of the plat. And State Code has given one of these erasers to town councils. The other eraser has been given to the plan commissions. And each eraser can only erase certain things. In your case, the eraser that has been given to the town council, you have the authority to erase what are termed public ways. Public ways include streets, alleys, and easements. The eraser that has been provided to the plan commission, they can erase things such as lot lines, and any private items such as the CC&Rs that I mentioned. So the process that the vacation of the town of Hamilton is going through as it relates to Section 4 of Holiday Farms is a two-step process. We're asking you today to erase the public streets and any alleys and any easements that were part of the original town of Hamilton. And then at tonight's plan commission hearing, they will be asked to erase the remaining lots. And we don't know of any CCRs for the town of Hamilton, but just in case there would be some, we've asked that those be erased also. What this two-step process will do is, again, going back to your whiteboard, it will erase all remnants of the town of Hamilton and allow Hinkie Development to then move forward with platting Section 4 of Holiday Farms onto now a blank canvas or blank whiteboard, you might say. That's the quick presentation. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Or Mr. Hamilton, he's losing his town. Does this come with a staff recommendation, Roger?
Yes, it does. And we do support the petition to vacate the public rights of ways, streets and alleys located within this portion of the platted town of Hamilton. And just for full disclosure, the town of Hamilton was formerly known at some time as Clarkstown. But in the plat that is currently recorded, it is actually labeled as the platted town of Hamilton, formerly Clarkstown.
The good news is, Josh, he ended up with his own county, so right next
and
door.
And a hit Broadway play.
Yeah, and a hit Broadway play. Yeah. Not bad.
This is a public hearing, so while counselors think about any questions they may have, I'm going to go ahead and share proof of publication for this specific agenda item, as long as I can. Here we go. Hopefully everyone is seeing proof of publication.
Roger, Craig Milton.
Oh, Craig, hold on a sec, please, 1 second.
Okay.
Just I've got proof of publication. I've got to open a public hearing.
Okay.
Just to make sure that there's any member of the community who wants to speak on this specific one. If there is, please raise your hand. All right, I don't see anyone wishing to speak unless I will close this public hearing. Craig, go ahead, please, with your question.
CCRs, Roger, what are those again? I heard you talking about them. I know what SCO, CCR mean is my first question. And then the other secondary question is Clarkstown. Did they have any public right-of-ways or streets or alleys that we also need to get rid of, or it's done with the new change of name?
Okay, very quickly, the CC&Rs stand for conditions, covenants, or restrictions. Those have really become more of a factor in platting, I would say, within the last 10 to 15 years, maybe even 20 years. Again, we do not know of any that apply to this plat that we're discussing in this specific case. But those could be things such as a developer may require a minimum size house to go on a lot. Again, I'm confining this to residential development. A developer may require a certain size of home to be on the lot. They may require certain architectural styles. These are just conditions, covenants, and restrictions that would apply specifically to that subdivision.
Thank you.
Okay, and your second question was, are there any streets or things, were you referring to just Clarkstown or this specific plat?
I was referring to Clarkstown since the name had changed supposedly. So therefore there'd be potential two plattings, I guess. And so if we got rid of one, would that really leave one that we left unturned to get rid of as well?
Okay, I understand your question. Thank you. That there really are not two plats. It's just that the name of the town changed. The layout did not change. One, they simply changed the name from Clarkstown to Hamilton. So there were not two plats, same plat, just they changed the name on it.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on this? If not, I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
A second from Councilor Choi. I heard him first. Amy, can you do a roll call?
Yes, but did you close the public hearing?
I did,
I
Amy.
missed that. Okay, thank you. Okay, President Garrett,
Yes.
Vice President Traylor,
Yes.
Councilor Burke,
Yes.
Councilor Choi,
Yes.
Councilor Culp,
Yes.
Councilor Milton,
Yes.
and Councilor Plunkett.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good. Ordinance number 2020-10 is introduced on a first reading with a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Next up, and very much related, we have a consideration of an ordinance vacating a drainage easement. This is the Taurus drainage easement. This is also a public hearing, and it's ordinance number 2020-11. I see both Mr. Kilmer and potentially Mr. Burris if we need him listed here. But Roger, anything additional you'd want to add to this?
I would like to clarify now, because again, I mentioned there were two different erasers and two different ways that things could be either erased or moved. This project, the vacation of the drainage easements, is just a little bit different in that what you are being asked to vacate and the method that things are going to happen at the Plan Commission. I just want you to be informed of it. What is before you now is to vacate two 7.5 foot wide drainage easements that were platted as part of the secondary plat of Lost Run Farm subdivision. This was established back in 2004. And what is standard within our subdivision control ordinance and zoning ordinance is that in a residential subdivision at this time, we have a lot line that is dividing lots 19 and 20. Both lots, 19 and 20, are currently owned by Daniel Taurus, who is represented by Mr. Burris. What Mr. Taurus is wanting to do is erase the lot line and the existing drainage easements that are on each side of that lot line so that he can have one single larger lot. The process to erase that lot line and the two easements, again, we go back to the two erasers. You've been given the eraser that can erase the drainage easements. The Plan Commission has been given the eraser that can take care of the lot line. So with the request before you today is to erase the drainage easements. Those drainage easements do not include any infrastructure. There are there's no infrastructure in those areas. They are truly just surface drains. And the process that the Plan Commission will be utilizing to remove the lot line is not a vacation, which was done in the Henke proposal, but in this case, they will be doing what is called a replat. They will be replatting those two lots into a single lot, erasing the lot line. So the end result would be you are erasing the drainage easements, and the Plan Commission would be removing the one lot line, combining the two lots into a single lot.
Roger, is there any danger in doing this that would allow for some sort of construction of a patio or a building that would then prevent drainage that is happening today by eliminating the draining easement? In other words, could this cause a flooding issue by eliminating this draining easement?
I will say that not only this case, but also the previous, the Henke case, have been completely reviewed by the town's technical advisory committee, which does include stormwater and drainage, and all the different departments have reviewed these, and they are in favor. There's been no opposition expressed to either of these requests. So would this cause any problems? No, because this drainage that had been planned can still be accommodated for on the resulting single lot.
Got it. Much like our last showing, this is also, or last agenda item, this is also a public hearing. That is not what I was hoping to share. That is what I was hoping to share. This is proof of publication of this public hearing. I will now open the public hearing. If there's any member of the audience who would like to speak on this particular matter, please raise your hand virtually and you'll be called upon. I do not see any hands raised from attendees, so I will go ahead and close this public hearing. Councilors, any other questions on this matter for either of the Rogers? If not, I would take a motion on this matter.
I'll make a motion to move forward with the vacations of land and ordinance 2020-10 and 2020-11.
Very good. We've got a motion from Councilor Melton. Is there a second?
Second.
That was a second from Councilor Burke. Amy, can you do a roll call on this?
President Garrett,
Yes.
Vice President Trailer,
Sorry, give me just a second here.
Sure, Brian.
This is only on ordinance 2020-11, correct?
This would be on 2020-11. That was the motion was made. That is correct.
The motion that was made was on 2020-10 and 2020-11. I just wanted to clarify.
Oh,
so
sorry,
it should be.
thank you.
So it should
Make a
just
motion.
be.
Make the motion for 2020-11, pardon me.
All right, thank
No,
you.
we have clarification. Brad, are you still good with the second on 2020-11?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Thanks for that clarification, Brian and Amy. I'm still a yes for
Okay.
2020-11.
okay, Councilor Burke,
Yes.
Councilor Choi,
Yes.
Councilor Culp,
Yes.
Councilor Melton,
Yes.
and Councilor Plunkett.
Do we
We
ever get
still
a
need-
vote from Councilor
Yes.
Trailer, Vice
Yeah, we
President Trailer?
still need, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm a
Councilor-
yes.
Okay,
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ordinance 2020-11 is introduced on first reading with a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Home stretch here, I promise. Next, we have a consideration of an ordinance reestablishing the safety board for fire department matters. This is ordinance number 2020-12. Heather, you and I were both working on this. Do you want to give a little background perhaps for counselors on this, Matt?
Yeah, and maybe if I could, I'll give a little background on this as well as the Board of Police Commissioners, because they do tie together in terms of why we're considering them at the same time. I know that the mayor expressed some concerns earlier as well. We've been working on this, including having conversations with, the administration and the administration's legal team for at least a month, if not more, at this point. And so I do want to let the council members know that, we've been kind of working through a variety of different legal issues and are bringing you 2 ordinances for consideration. The first is the one before you, which is reestablishing the safety board for fire department matters. The second one then will be the Board of Police Commissioners, which will reestablish the Board of Police Commissioners for safety board matters for the police department. And there's a statute that exists that, provides some direction specifically with respect to the Board of Police Commissioners, and I can talk about that when we get to that agenda item. With respect to the safety board, the town council members have long served as the safety board for any matters that would come before the town related to discipline, demotion, any other sort of employment matters related to the fire department. Historically, the safety board has also considered things like appointing the fire chief, which is no longer appropriate since we have language in our reorganization document, which is resolution 2014-11, that clearly delineates that authority to the mayor to select the chief of the department and the department heads. So we have also included that clarity in this resolution to ensure that if someone were looking at this, they would understand that that role and responsibility rests with the mayor under the reorganization. We've also clarified in this ordinance that the fire chief is a department head for purposes of the reorganization documents, which would require, if a department head is going to be removed, a majority vote of the town council. And so we're not changing anything from the reorganization, but we are clarifying it here. Lastly, we are making sure that we are sort of delineating what the role of the safety board will be. We've had some encroachment, if you will, on duties through the years. Oftentimes things would land at the safety board when we had a town structure that did not have a mayor. Now that we have a mayor, maybe more appropriate, for example, to look at a variance request through the administration or through the planning department versus through the safety board. So we've tightened up the scope to really align with the statute that you're really looking at the disciplinary functions of reviewing, recommendations, in this case from the fire chief for the demotion or dismissal or other discipline for a fire department member. So with that, President Garrett, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I think it's a fairly simple and straightforward ordinance.
Heather, the mayor mentioned earlier in the public comment section that she had not had a chance to review this ordinance, which is about a page long. I'm trying to phrase this in the right way. I never like to play gotcha with anyone. Have they been aware? Have you been working with the mayor's attorney on this coming?
Yes, we've been talking about this issue for over a month. And so, my concern is with waiting, just for the council members to know, we do have a pending disciplinary matter within the fire department. So we do need to ensure that this, board is able to meet and to act in that adjudicatory role. So I am concerned about delaying this process. We would, we sort of started this process at the request of the mayor and the mayor's administration, who was concerned that we didn't have this properly papered as an ordinance within the town. And so that is why we're here, today with 2 recommendations. When we went back, we did have a Board of Police Commissioners ordinance on the books, but we did not have a safety board ordinance on the books. And I think that's really a function of how the safety board statute works, because it delineates to the town council, historically, that if you are in a town, we're in a unique structure, obviously now with the town with a mayor, but the town council would then serve as the safety board for purposes of fire discipline if you have a full-time fire department. So that is what we are working to do, is to actually ensure that they're properly constituted which was a request generated by the administration originally.
And this is I did not have any intent of fast tracking this today. In other words, this is an ordinance that requires 2 meetings, despite that pending employment matter that's been pending for a while. We still have to do this again on the 5th. So if there are any questions that come up from the mayor, mayor's council, or councilors between now and then, we certainly want to have that dialogue. Councilors, questions on this? Go ahead, Troy.
Yeah,
Councilor
just a
Troy.
question. If we were to make changes to this ordinance, if we adopt it on first reading today, what we would have to pass on second reading would be this ordinance. If changes were made to it, then it would have to come back for a first reading again. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay, but it doesn't stipulate that we can't bring it back for it. So if we were to make changes to it, it doesn't matter now whether we pass this on first reading or not now, because delaying it, we would have to revisit it again on first reading at the next council meeting.
Right, you could, and you could also at the next council meeting, if you wanted to propose amendments or amendments were proposed, you could go ahead and adopt it again on first reading, take it back to first reading, make those amendments, adopt it, suspend the rules, and still pass it, in a final adoption at the same meeting if you chose to do that. And there is some urgency in making sure this gets done. Like I said, we do have a pending employment matter, so that is going to need to come before the safety board in the near term. So we need to kind of, and from my perspective, keep it moving to the extent we can.
Heather,
yeah, I just want to make sure that there is an opportunity for the mayor to weigh in on what, for her to have time to digest this specific one.
Right. As well, yeah,
so
the mayor, the public, others, yeah, absolutely.
Right. So we're not asking to suspend the rules and try to pass it on this first reading or today's council meeting. I didn't know if that would work. I don't see that the mayor is on anymore.
Well,
if the deputy mayor would like to comment, or if
yeah, so I think the mayor has made her position. I don't want to turn every council meeting into a public debate necessarily, but certainly want to have conversation. To clarify something, any counselor at any point could make a motion to suspend the rules. This is not for this, but just in general, any counselor can make a motion to suspend the rules, another counselor could second it, and that you could go through the 3 steps on any ordinance if someone so chose. It's just one of those things where it's just a matter of voting, right? So if someone chose to do that today, that's not something I think people would be interested in. I'm not interested in doing that. I want to go through a fair process to do that. Councilor Melton, did you have a question?
Yeah. Were we supposed to all receive this this ordinance that we're voting on now prior to this meeting?
Yes, you should have received it from Amy.
In your council packet.
Right.
Yeah, about a week ago.
Yeah.
The ordinance 20-12 reestablishing the safety board for fire department matters final. It was done on 9/16/2020 at 1:06 p.m.
Right.
So Heather, your suggestion is that we move to adopt this today, knowing that if we want to make changes, and the mayor has suggestions, that'll all still be able to happen in due process.
And this is semantics, but really I think it would be not move to adopt, but move to introduce.
Okay. The
move to adoption would happen at the second reading that will happen. But yes, and I agree with that statement.
So I would move to introduce this ordinance.
So we've got a motion to introduce. I will second, but before I do a roll call, I just want to make sure there are no other questions or comments from councilors on this matter.
I have a comment, and this is just for the public information, because I don't want it to appear that we're not sensitive to the mayor's request to delay this. But we're not getting the same consideration, the opposite direction. I mean, big example, we just had a 2-hour conversation about budgets because we weren't involved in that process. Her administration has been involved in this process. For transparency as well, we had a safety board meeting that had to be canceled the day before the meeting because the mayor's office gave direction to the fire department not to communicate with the safety board until further notice. So to say that we're not being sensitive to giving the mayor an opportunity to review these documents, it goes both ways. But we've given more information and more notice that direction than we're getting. So just want that on the record for anybody that may be viewing this.
And I appreciate that, Councilor Trailer. And the reason I make those comments is that, just from my standpoint of regardless of what somebody else has done, I want to make sure that I feel good about the process that I'm going to take and would want anybody else to take as well. So those are the reasons for my questions.
Well, hopefully, I think it's fair on both sides, and an opportunity to work together is good for all parties. So, we have a motion introduced from Councilor Perk. I have seconded. Amy, do you want to do a roll call on that?
President Garrett,
Yes.
Vice President Trailer,
Yes.
Councilor Burke,
Yes.
Councilor Choi,
Yes.
Councilor Culp,
Yes.
Councilor Melton,
You're on mute.
Yes.
Councilor Plunkett.
Yes.
Very good. Ordinance number 2020-12 is introduced with a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Last new matter, I promise. We've got a consideration of an ordinance reestablishing the Board of Metropolitan Police Commissioners as the safety board for police matters. This is ordinance number 2020-13. Heather, I know, had just talked about this. And anything, Heather, you would add to that? I've actually got a quick question on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a current ordinance on the books that was passed in 2008. It did not reflect the reorganization language. So one of the key changes that you'll see between the ordinance that was previously adopted in 2008 and this ordinance is a reflection of all of that language from the reorganization, which allows for the mayor to appoint the fire chief as well as the employees and have those employees under her supervision. So we did want to make sure that we clarified that. There also is a requirement that for the members that are appointed, that there be political balance. That's something that's statutorily required. So that is also reflected here. That does not apply to the town council members who are appointed to the Board of Police Commissioners, but to the lay members it does apply. And again, we wanted to tighten up sort of what the Board of Police Commissioners role and responsibilities will be now that we have a mayoral administration that will be putting together a lot of the day-to-day, sort of employment policies. We do and still will retain for the Board of Police Commissioners the review of those police department standard operating procedures. Some of the other ancillary items can be handled within the administration and the administration staff. So we really are just reflecting that reorg and cleaning up that language and also clarifying that for purposes of the safety board statute, which talks about police discipline, that the Board of Police Commissioners is the appropriate entity for police department matters to serve in that role.
To that point, there is a Board of Police Commissioners meeting that has been scheduled to follow this meeting. There's really only one agenda item, which is the appointment of the Use of Force Board, which I know is something that both the mayor and Chief Spears are in favor of, and certainly I am as well. Is there any problem, since there already is an ordinance on the books, continuing to have that meeting, even though we'll reestablish this?
Yeah, and that's
it's just reestablishing the boundaries of it versus the board. Yeah, okay. I want to confirm that.
right. Yep.
Do we need to, Josh, Heather, I don't know who would handle this, but will we need to reappoint or how do we move with, so the Board of Police Commissioners will keep the same board members, or will they just be reappointed by various parties, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we did put in the ordinance, since we're reestablishing that a continuation of the current appointments. We do make those appointments in January. So I do think when we are looking at the appointments, we want to make sure that we have the appropriate political balance. And but we did add language specifically to say that we're not, through this ordinance, asking that the board be reconstituted.
That's good. That's a good question, Jason. Councilors, any other questions on this? All right, well, I'll go ahead and make a motion to introduce this ordinance. This is, I'm looking at the right document here. Ordinance number 2020-13.
I'll second.
A second for Vice President Traylor. Amy, do your magic, please.
Okay, President Garrett,
Yes.
Vice President Traylor,
Yes.
Councilor Burke,
Yes.
Councilor Choi,
Yes.
Councilor Culp,
Yes.
Councilor Melton,
Yes.
Councilor Plunkett.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good. Ordinance number 2020-13 is introduced with a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Next up, sort of almost last up, is other matters. Councilors, any other matters you'd like to discuss here? Sort of open forum, free jam, if you will. All right. Nothing on other matters. We'll then move to approval of claims. Claims were submitted. Any comment on claims before there are any motions?
I would just like to point out that in addition to increasing the legal fees in the next budget, we are rapidly approaching our surplus value and legal fees for the budgeted year.
Thank you, Councilor Plunkett. I'll make a motion to approve claims.
Second.
Second. Councilor Burke. Amy?
President Garrett,
Yes.
Vice President Traylor,
Yes.
Councilor Burke,
Yes.
Councilor Choi,
Yes.
Councilor Culp,
Yes.
Councilor Melton,
Yes.
and Councilor Plunkett.
Yes.
Very good. Claims are approved by a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. Who wants to make the honor of making a motion to adjourn this meeting?
I make a motion to, go ahead, to close this meeting.
I heard Councilor Culp. He at least started, but he didn't finish first, but he started first. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Councilor Choi.
Joy.
I promise not to call you just Choi again. Amy, go for it.
Okay, President Garrett,
Yes.
Vice President Traylor,
Yes.
Councilor Burke,
Yes.
Councilor Choi,
Yes.
Councilor Culp,
Yes.
Councilor Melton,
Yes.
Councilor Plunkett.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very good. We are adjourned by a vote of 7 in favor, 0 opposed. The next regular town council meeting is scheduled for Monday, October 5th, 2020 at 7 p.m. I am intending on this meeting to be in person. So I'm looking forward to seeing all your smiling faces, get back together and do this in person instead of Zoom. If something changes, we'll certainly let the public know, but wanted to inform the public if they want to speak. And Amy, I know that you have been working diligently with town staff to make sure that we can do this in a way that is safe for the public, for staff, and for counselors. So I appreciate your efforts on planning for that. We are adjourned. Thanks everyone for your patience. Have a good week.
Thank you, everybody. See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Be safe.